Hello. First of all, I have a nice little fun fact for all of you. I'm sure you never ever heard of that. The internet was originally invented for military reasons. You might have read about it in the newspaper, for example. But seriously, as any other technology, the digital technologies are ambivalent. They can be used as weapons. And our role, especially in Germany, is ambivalent, or put it more frankly, hypocritical about that, because our wealth partially is based on selling technologies who can be used as weapons. And this is right for software also. So, please welcome the following speakers to discuss today here on stage the necessity of export controls for dual-use software. Gotta change that quickly. Eric King, Head of Research at Privacy International, the Commissioner of the German government for Human Rights Policy and Humanitarian Aid, Markus Löning, Christian Mier, who is Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders in Germany, Andreas Bog, the spokesman of the Chaos Computer Club, and as your host, Géraldine de Bastion.
Thank you very much. So you already did such a nice introduction and introduced all the panelists that I'm going to have a very easy job today, and I'll keep it very short. To begin with, I would just like to start by telling a little story just to show how relevant what we're talking about today is in really everyday life. So a few weeks ago, we organized an event here in Berlin in cooperation with the Heinrich Böll Foundation and also with Reporters Without Borders, and invited different activists to come and join us from across the world. It was really a very colorful and wild mix of people, and some of these people were working on digital rights activism, but many of the others were working all different kinds of areas of activism: gender democracy, media rights campaigners, gay rights issues, so a lot of different fields they were active in. And one of them was a reggae musician from Yemen who goes to small villages and does different kind of community workshops there. And in the first day, he introduced himself on a panel and was showing he had this little government-endorsed paper and saying, yeah, I do government-endorsed activism, and all this is approved by the Yemenite government, and felt very safe with what he was doing. And during the course of the event, a lot of the tech-savvy people we had there, including people from the Chaos Communication Club and people from EFF, convinced him into checking his hard disk and found that for the past, well, not possible to say for how long, indefinite amount of time, he had been spied on because, basically surveillance software was found on his hard disk. It's now in a laboratory being examined, so we can hopefully find out where this came from and what it was, but this is a very complicated process. And of course, he was shocked at the fact when he found this, because he had felt very safe in the work that he was doing, only to discover that it was exactly the opposite. And he was being forced to be very transparent with all the activist work that he was doing. A little more light shed into the subject there. Transparency, good keyword. So I thought I'd begin by telling you this because also here at Republica, I wouldn't say for the first time, but we finally have a really good working internet connection, wireless connection. A lot of people walking around here, and I've seen people using devices without password protection. You can never be too careful about these things. And we're here today with our 4 excellent panelists to discuss the topic, why that is the case. So I would like to begin by asking a few questions on the panel, but you're all here not only to listen, but also to engage. So I will open the questions to the floor very soon, and would like to ask you all to join into our discussion. Christian, I'd like to give the first question to you and ask you to explain. A few months ago now it is, Reporters Without Borders launched a campaign to start convincing the German government that we need export control for dual-use software. Can you tell us what has happened since then, the experiences that you made, and maybe begin also by saying why a media organization like Reporters Without Borders is the one organization in Germany really pushing this topic?
Well, we as a media organization, since 20 years, more than 20 years, fighting for press freedom, we more and more in our assistance work, where we help in a very practical manner journalists and bloggers, we made the experience that more and more stories came to our ears that journalists and bloggers, we for a long time have a very broad understanding of journalism, in the sense that we campaign for freedom for bloggers as well. And more stories came to our ears that bloggers and journalists were affected by surveillance software, and we know stories about people being tortured due to the fact that they have been surveyed before. And that's why we, as a press freedom organization, decided to campaign and to advocate for a better control, not only in Germany, but on the European level as well. And we started this last summer with various means. We launched in August, if I'm right, in August we published first a position paper where we formulated basically two key issues which we are campaigning for. The first one is that we are campaigning and advocating for export control regime. I could go into further detail in the discussion if you want, and for not giving any more export guarantees, because from our perspective it's really a scandal that not only German government but even other European governments are securing the export of such surveillance software with export guarantees. And we, since the publication of this position paper in August, we did various things together with some partners, with Privacy International, with the ECCHR, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. We filed an OECD complaint against 2 software companies exporting such surveillance software. Then at the Internet Governance Forum, we presented some very concrete proposals how to regulate such things. And just recently, for luck, we were very happy, even the German Parliament for the first time talked about this topic, and for luck, not anymore only the more or less unimportant internet politicians, but the politicians dealing with foreign policy and things like that. And we are going on with this and with various partner organizations, but that's the current state of art. The OECD complaint is right now on the state of decision someday, but we still don't know how. Hopefully it will be allowed to talk with the companies, but I think we can discuss about the OECD complaint a bit in the discussion.
Yes, and I would also be interested to know how you perceive the growth of awareness towards this topic in the German government. So we'll definitely dig a little bit deeper into the issues that you've just raised. You said you partner with different organizations, and one of those is, it's okay, it's the last day of Republica, it's normal that the people running it and the place itself is falling apart a little bit. We're hanging in there. So one of those is Privacy International, where you work, Eric, running the Big Brother Incorporated project. Can you tell us a little bit what that is? And maybe also, how big is this market that we're looking at and really talking about here?
Sure. So I run a project at Privacy International called Big Brother Incorporated. And for the last 2 years, we've been investigating the trade in surveillance technologies around the world. It was something when we began the project, we had very little idea what we'd find. We didn't know what kind of market existed, what it looked like, who were the companies who were purchasing it. And what we were really trying to understand was if you're a human rights defender in Yemen and you want to send a message to somebody who's in danger, can you do that? Should you do that? Or are you going to reveal information? Is that message going to be intercepted? What capabilities does the Yemen government have? How often do they use it? Can they use it effectively? And then if there's an option, should you then send a text message? Should you make a phone call? Should you send an email? So we began the project trying to answer some of those questions, and I'm ashamed to say we're no further in answering those questions, but we do have a little bit of a better understanding. Over the last 2 years, we've uncovered an entire marketplace in association with a whole range of NGOs and journalists who have taken on this issue, and it's been this fantastic kind of zeitgeist where everyone's realized just what this market looks like. And what we found are 355 Western surveillance companies. That number is growing. And these are largely based in America and Europe, with a particular focus in the UK and Germany. And these are not technology companies as we understand them. They're technology companies selling surveillance technology as a consultancy service. They're not packaging up a box and shipping it off to an unknown destination where they don't understand how it's getting used or what purpose it's being put to. This is a very, very close relationship between the companies and the governments that are purchasing this technology. Two of the biggest companies that we've been focusing on with Reporters Without Borders and others are Gamma International, a British, German-based company, and Trovacor, also a German company. And in these circumstances, they spend years before they finally deploy some technology, mapping out where in the network certain infection proxies need to be placed, where monitoring sensors need to be installed. They provide technical support. This is a really kind of critical issue that needs to be understood in this. This isn't neutral technology being shipped off in a way that nobody understands how it's being used. They provide 24 hours round-the-clock technical support. So when there's a protest, they can pick up the phone and say, hey, something's gone down, we need some added capabilities, what can you hook us up with? In some of these circumstances, you actually pay licenses for the number of people you can spy on at any one time. So you can buy bumper packages, and it's licensed in the same way as digital rights management use this technology. So for me, export controls are a really, really important thing that needs to be done to begin to get this technology under control. Now, when we talk about export controls, one of the kind of biggest criticisms that I always get is that it won't fix the whole problem, right? People are still going to, the companies in Ukraine will start providing the service. Companies in China might. For me, that's fine. Export controls don't need to fix 100% of the problem. If they can fix 80% of it, it's still worth doing. And I think that's the point that I really want everyone to kind of go away with today. Whatever your view on export controls, whether or not you think it's going to be 100% effective, whether it's going to stop every single technology company selling surveillance technology, no, it's not. But is it going to do something? Is it going to make an improvement? Are we going to get further down that line? And I think undoubtedly the answer is yes.
Thank you, Eric. It's a call for action. I like that there already, and hopefully we'll have some more throughout this discussion. Before I bring in the other two panelists, I want to get back and just ask, okay, so export control, let's just define that and really pin that down. When you say that, what do you mean by that? What is the solution that you're actually looking for that you'd be happy with as an outcome?
Well, one solution we are in a very concrete manner are advocating for are 2 points. For an so-called annex in the Wassenaar agreements. It's a multilateral agreement between several states worldwide regulating the export of conventional weapons. And we are advocating for here on the European level for one annex regulating, explaining which kind of technology should be handled as weapons, and that's why we very consciously use the term digital weapons. That's the first thing. The second thing is that such a regulation as within the Wassenaar Agreement could be done already on a national level with the national export regulation regime. So those are two very concrete proposals, and the third point actually is no more export guarantees for such technology. And transparency in this. We are trying to get transparency in the export control regime because so far it's only public that there have been issued export guarantees for such technology, but we at Reporters Without Borders, we are doing research and investigation which countries were given export guarantees in Germany, but in other countries as well.
You agree with all of that? Is that what you'd be looking for as well?
Well, I don't think that we need to necessarily think of them as weapons for them to still be legitimately controlled. I think, again, something that often gets confused when we're talking about export controls is that we're only trying to stop the stuff that is 100% evil and bad. And actually, the whole point of export controls is that you are able to control legitimate technologies, things like lawful interception management systems, systems that we use in Germany or in the UK, and it's entirely appropriate for an export control regime to control those technologies as well. An export control regime basically says is these are technologies that we recognized can be put to a purpose that could violate human rights. That's one of the considerations why you'd introduce an export control on a product. And very clearly, what we call lawful interception technologies, and there's a whole debate around whether that's an appropriate term or not, but putting that aside for the moment, you can absolutely see that even selling what we call lawful interception technologies in Iran, where there's very little rule of law, is a bit of an oxymoron. It doesn't quite make sense, and it's very plain that this is technology that could be used to target activists, to target journalists, and to target pro-democracy supporters. And so I think that's an important thing to realize as well, is that it can be stuff that we might otherwise think of as good, but in the wrong hands could be used for a malicious purpose.
Which again brings in this ambivalence, it doesn't make it quite easy. Maybe you can pass your mic down that way and you can grab number one. I've been told it's like with Ghostbusters, do not cross the mics. I think this is very important. Herr Löning, I know that you're one of the, let's say, one of the few good men, one of the supporters in what's happening here. Can you perhaps share two things? Why you're the human government spokesperson of the German government, why, from your very personal perspective, is this a human rights issue that we're talking about here? And how do you see the level of awareness increasing in the German government?
Well, I'm not the only one that is against exporting technology that can be abused for human rights. I mean, for human rights offenses. I think that's something that everybody in the German government tries to do. The question is even more ambivalent than you put it. I mean, answering the question whether we should export certain kinds of technology to Iran, that's very easy. You say no. I mean, there's a clear ban to export these kinds of technologies to Iran. But what do you do with countries where there is abuse, but where there's also cooperation on issues like fighting drug crime, organized crime, human trafficking, or other things? There it starts to get a lot more difficult to assess, is this technology which is used and needed to fight organized crime on one side, but is the same technology also used to fight human rights defenders? And there you see where the dilemma lies and how difficult it is to make an assessment that never does any harm. And this is why it's not so easy to just say, well, it's very clear, this technology is always harmful and it will always be abused. Unfortunately, it's not like that. What I do see is that there is a clear need for export control for these technologies that can be abused. If the possibility of abuse is there, there should be an export control. And I think the way that was shown up with the Wassenaar Agreement would be one way, where 40 countries have agreed to have a common list where technologies are listed, where countries are listed, and say if someone asks to export a technology to a certain country, there must be an export license, and there must be a decision on the export license, and these 40 countries share the information about the license, whether the license was given or whether it was not given, and who asked for the license, so that there is some cohesion and some coherence between these countries. Personally, I believe we need to do that. We do talk between the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Economics at the moment how we can actually do that. There's a proposal by the French and the UK government towards the Wassenaar Agreement, which we think is a good proposal, which we do support. So there is an ongoing, we're not at the end of the debate, because we haven't understood the complete depth and complexity of the problem yet. But there's an ongoing debate, and the political goal is very clear, that we have export control on technologies that can harm human rights.
This is making it sound very positive, though, in terms of course, there's only so much that the Foreign Ministry or you as an individual can actually do, but already being in discussion with the Ministry of Economics. However, I would argue that, I mean, I know I've been speaking to a secretary from a different ministry, I will not name it right now, who's not maybe directly the one ministry to make decisions, but definitely would be involved in this and would have a context. They didn't even know this existed. Yeah. And I would also argue that the Ministry of Economics has such economic interests in keeping the status quo that there's not going to be much room to maneuver. How do you, just like maybe even in a percentage, like how do you see this chances for success of actually implementing something like this with the current government?
Well, first of all, the more debates like this one take place, the better the chances are that we get export control faster. I think there will be export control. The question is how fast and how tight will it be? And the more the issue is raised in public, the faster and the tighter the control will be. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I think it's important that we do that and that we move faster than we do at the moment. There is awareness in the Ministry of Economics. The Ministry of Economics is always, they always say, export control, hang on, we're in favor of free trade. Let's really look, is this really necessary? I mean, that's part of their job. I mean, it's not their job to make life more difficult for companies. It's their job to make export more easier. But it's also their job to make sure that the wrong things don't leave Germany. And I don't think there's big economic interest in this specific technology. We're talking about several hundreds employments in Germany, maybe 1,000 maximum, probably less. So I don't think this is a question of money, of influence, of big economic interest. I think this is more a question of, can we really define what we're talking about? I mean, to be honest, I don't understand, because I don't understand the technology behind it.
So that's the perfect cue, thank you very much. Let me pass the mic now to, last but not least, to Andreas here on the panel. You're a hacker, you're with the CCC, and we've talked a little bit now about the ambivalence of dual use. Can you help us understand what the issue is here and yes, shed a bit of light on this technological matters also to the other panelists? Yes, explain directly.
There are several issues you need to look at. And the first one is, why is it called dual use? Most weapons are actually not dual use. Yeah? They're used to shoot people. That's not dual use technology. That's a weapon. And the problem is that a lot of the stuff that can be used for human rights violations is the same kind of technology that's used by system administrators every day to maintain the computers. One example is a software called Wireshark, which is used to analyze network traffic. Almost everybody who does systems administration used it sooner or later. It's a way to look at the actual network packets that go across the wire. And of course you use that to see what's going wrong on the internet. On the other hand, you can also say, please give me all the passwords that run across that stream. That's pretty clear cut for me. That's a tool which I don't have much problems even if it's exported. There are other cases that are not as clear cut. The next example I would like to come up with is a software called Metasploit, because that actually involves breaking into computers. It's a collection of so-called exploits that use bugs and software to get into a computer and to put your own software on the computer for the purpose of spying, changing data, etc., etc. So if you see there's a Trojan on somebody's computer, that's where you would use Metasploit. That's also a free tool that's mainly used for finding out whether your own network is secure or not. So that's the main purpose. So we have to defend against cyber criminals, we have to defend against international espionage in the field. So again, that's a tool that goes more into the direction of actually being able to be abused, on the other hand. And then there is technology where it's pretty clear cut. You mentioned products that come with a service. You're not actually buying a piece of software, a piece of technology, you're buying a service. And the very purpose, if you look at the descriptions of the products, it's usually they're using a little bit of modeling language, but it ends up being you're able to monitor any communication of a user, be it chat, email, or everything, and look for keywords, and even big data streams. So that's something that it's pretty close to not being dual use anymore, because it doesn't even have a technical purpose of debugging something, but it has the only purpose of spying on people. And if you have dual use, it's like regular police work, like looking into cyber crimes. That would be a legitimate use of that software. Another issue that I see is that it's not that easy to transfer the existing export control regime to new technology. Like if you build tanks, building a tank isn't easy. You need a huge factory, you need to be very good at working with metal, and tanks are large chunks of metal that aren't that easy to export. So people keep trying. I remember a case where in the haven in Hamburg, they found tanks declared as agricultural machines. So, but yeah, in the end, it's much easier to actually control physical goods than it is to control digital goods. So it also leads me to the question, what constitutes an export? If I have a website and put some code on that website, does that constitute an export? Would, under the regulations, I be responsible as owner of the website to figure out whether the downloader comes from one of the terrorist countries or not? That's a big problem. And the third issue I see is that it reminds me of the export controls we've seen in the 90s in the United States, the so-called crypto wars back then. So cryptographic software like PGP you could use to encrypt and sign your messages was export restricted, export controlled in the US. And that's a piece of software that up till today is used by lots of human rights activists everywhere in the world. And back then, the export control was circumvented by printing out the source code as a book, exporting the book because that was legal under the free speech amendment in the Constitution. And then people typed it back into the computer. So that's issue number 3. How do we prevent keeping the technology out of the hands of people who actually need it?
I hope the two of you are keeping those 3 issues in mind, because I'm going to ask you both to react to that in a minute. But having raised those critical points, and thank you for having done that, what would you see, because I'm sure we all recognize the problem that's inherent in this discussion, what would you see as a viable solution, or what would be a route that you would see preferable to take?
Well, I've thought about that for a while in preparation of the talk, and so my rough idea would be, at the moment where somebody makes money, you have a paper trail that's enforceable. So if you actually sell something somewhere, if you write an invoice to another country, that's something that you can control and trace.
Did you get that? Or do you want to elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, would it be useful? So there are some questions posed there that I think I can help to answer, that maybe we can kind of see where we get to after that.
Oh, yes, I'm going to let you answer to those questions, but
okay.
just to...
just elaborate. I think in the end, I wouldn't want to get into trouble for putting a piece of source code on my own website that explains how to break into computers, because that's needed education to get our software better, to get the world a better place. But if somebody actually sells surveillance software to bad state, I want that to be illegal. So I think following the money is the cue on getting the right solution here.
Right, so we're not criminalizing the technology, but the way it's put into use.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that, thank you. Okay, so yes, Eric, now it's your chance. Grab the mic.
Thank you.
Your reaction to the 3 points that Andreas raised?
So we've come a long way from the 90s. Privacy International spent the first 15 years of its existence fighting against the crypto wars, saying that cryptography is a defensive technology to protect people, to secure communication is a critical thing, and that export control should not be in place on those technologies. So I'm in complete agreement. But export controls have developed, they've changed in how they're applied, and they've got better. They're still not perfect, but they've got a lot better. And so many of the questions that were of real concern during the crypto wars have begun to be answered. So for example, if you run a website and you make something freely available, currently under export controls, if something's in the public domain or is available over the counter, it cannot be controlled by export controls. It means it is not a category of software or technology that could ever be controlled. And that is a key criteria to see whether any technology could ever be placed on that list. And so I'm in complete agreement. If there's something that's freely available, can be purchased over the counter, or even available over the counter, shouldn't be controlled. It's pointless. It make a mockery of everything we're trying to do. And I think that some of those definitions can be expanded upon as well to put kind of stronger protections for free software developers and open source developers as well to make sure that they're protected. The second point that you talked about tanks. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I'm almost coming to the point where I think that tanks, controlling Gamma's Finfisher might be easier to control than a tank. So when you export a tank, it's a thing that you need to put some petrol in and you can drive it around. But anyone can do that. Anyone can sit in the tank, drive it around to a new country, and if you don't happen to have a camera kind of catching it at that point, you kind of can't do anything about it. Anyone can use it, and in 10 years' time, that tank is still going to fire a missile if it's kind of got a missile in it. Whereas with Finfisher, it's the actual Trojan itself is a tiny component of what makes it effective. What Finfisher really is an entire infection system that covers an entire country. Every single installation is custom. It would be almost impossible, or at least not worth the while, to ever grab an installation of Finfisher in a certain country and transpose that to a different country. It would just be an absurd waste of time. You may as well just start from scratch on what you're doing, because even a year on, the technology is going to be completely out of date. So in that way, some of these technologies are actually easier to control than some of the things that we traditionally think of as export controllable, which I think is an interesting way of rethinking about some of it. And finally, to talk about some of the categories of surveillance technology that could get kind of missed, that get caught in the middle. Satellite phone interception technology is physical custom hardware. IMSI catchers, GSM interception devices. These are all kind of a whole range of products that sit in the middle that rarely kind of come up as part of conversations, but are definitely the products that I'm wanting to focus on, that I think can be controlled and should be controlled, and a lot more clear-cut than kind of any of the open source tools that we sometimes kind of end up talking about.
Christian, you also wanted to react.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that you mentioned the cryptography issue, because I think that's a very important point, just to mention how politics is important and how policy regulation is important, because the decision to regulate cryptography 20 years ago, or when it was the discussion, and for integrating cryptography even in the Wassenaar Agreement, was a political decision in the end, because cryptography is some technology which has such a dual-use character as well. It can be used for military reasons, it can be used for circumvention, and that's where policy comes in, policy regulation, because in the end it's a decision, a political decision, how to evaluate and how to assess such technology. And that's why I think the comparison with cryptography somehow is a very good symbol, emblematic, how such a regulation could be. And just to give one another current issue, there is a good example how such a regulation could somehow work. I don't want to confuse regulation with sanctions, but we have a more or less functioning sanctions regime within the European Union and in Germany, which includes such technology. It's a sanctions regime against Syria and Iran, and from our perspective at Reporters Without Borders, at least, I think that's a very good example how such a regulation could work, even if it's very focused only on Syria and Iran.
So again, focusing on single countries as the recipients of these technologies rather on the system as such. I would like to start opening the floor to your questions. We have about 20 good minutes left, so you can give me a sign of hand if you have one, or start preparing it. Oh, there are two already. Okay, then I'll put my questions back and I'll start taking yours first. The gentleman in the back was first. Is there somebody here to help with a mic going around? Paul? Okay.
Hi, my name is Sascha Stoltenau, and we will be having a session, Digital Natives Going to War, at 1:45. So I was an officer in the German army, and what I find interesting is all I've learned about the web is it's uncontrollable. All I learned about history, you cannot control things. You know, you have the ant route going into Gaza, you cannot control it, you have the tunnels. So I'd rather say export more, but to the civilians. So, and this is where I see that the German government is doing a really bad job. They're not able to get a visa to people coming from Jordan to Berlin. And we are talking about controlling arms and software and dual-use goods. And yes, they are used by foreign governments, But what we could really do is help civilian society, and I'm telling you that as a former soldier, and this is going to be the real threat, and it needs the political will to put that in practice.
Can you pass the mic to the gentleman in the front, but can you keep your question for just 1 second, because I want to pick up on that. So in my experience, and this isn't the case in Germany, but it's even more so the case in a lot of other places around the world, there is very, very little knowledge about digital security and how to actually protect your individual devices. And so the idea of protecting yourself against whatever is threatening you is something that doesn't even occur to most people, even if they're using digital technologies to work politically. And then there are other contexts, like some of the ones we started speaking in this morning. Take the Yemenite dissident or somebody from Ethiopia, for instance. You have very limited possibilities to actually protect yourself digitally without making yourself even more suspicious to the government that you're trying to hide things from. So maybe that's something, Andreas, I'd like to also ask you. I'm usually a fan of the idea, let's solve it bottom up and not top down, but how would you react to the comment the gentleman made?
Well, the problem is the average civilian won't be able to buy those solutions we are talking about. They are completely able to download something from the web and work with that, and we see that. So in the end, it ends up being hacking back the government, which surprisingly enough often works because nobody really knows how to defend against digital attacks. And yeah, I don't think that an export restriction done right would harm the dissidents in civilian uprising, because they're the ones who are using open sources and open tools to do their work.
Yes, please.
Maybe I would like to say something about what you just said. First, I think this is a very interesting idea, what you said, export more. Secondly, I'd like to say that, of course, government, German government, all European governments, American government are giving a lot of support to civil society activists, all different kinds of support. Money, training, visits, this and that. But what we need is, we're not the think tanks of our societies. We're not the creative people of societies. Creative people are civil society activists, people that know about these dangers, people that are either journalists or technology people that know how to do these things. And if an NGO comes out and says, listen, we're training activists that work in the Middle East and we're showing them how to use their technology in a safe way, could you fund us? That is what the government can do. But the ideas have to come from you guys, from NGO guys, from people that are really on the ground and know what the problem today is. That government is never really good at that.
Christian, you also wanted to
Just
react quickly.
Two remarks. Of course, you can't solve all the problems with any regulation, as the export of conventional weapons isn't solved, but it's just one attempt, it's just one remark, and of course I'm not naive and I don't believe that this will be the final solution to all the problems, but we are fighting for press freedom and human rights all around the world since lots of years, and yeah, every day happen violations of press freedom. But to you, I just want to give you one, I want to comment a bit from our experience at Reporters Without Borders and our assistance work. I don't share your experience at lots of activists, journalists. We are helping through our assistance work, bloggers, that they are aware of open source technologies, circumvention technologies. Lots of those people, unfortunately, aren't aware of such technology very good, and lots of people came in situations of danger because there's such a lack of awareness. So I don't share your experience on that from our work at Reporters Without Borders, from our assistance work.
I strongly disagree with your argument that you said that it's much more easy to regulate a tank than Finn Fisher, for example, because Finn Fisher is outdated till next year or something like this. But if you look, for example, then you told about IMSI catcher. You want to try to regulate IMSI catcher and interception for GSM and networks, I guess. but the knowledge for this kind of technology is out there. You don't need those devices. I can soldering, I know how to build this stuff, and I don't need to buy the devices, I just download the information, and you can't stop this kind of information. So I think that's diametrical. So, but I can't build a tank. And I know how to build a tank, but I can't build because I don't have the stuff for this.
More of a statement, but do you still want to react?
Yeah, so what's so interesting about the change in how we kind of want to regulate kind of the things that are doing harm to our society is that you're exactly right. There has been this shift, internationally, where now anyone can build and develop these tools, right? I mean, you can build an IMSI catcher for £200. I mean, less than that. I mean, depends how good your IMSI catcher want to be, whether you want 5 phones rather than 1 or whatever. What's great, though, is that governments don't want to do that. They're not doing that. The reason that this industry exists, the reason why these guys are being able to make money is not because they're building stuff that is unique or that we don't understand. It's because they're providing it as a consultancy service. They're providing the full package. Governments who are purchasing these technologies don't know how to build it. They don't have the technical capabilities, and they don't want to develop it. And so what they're doing instead is purchasing a complete solution from these companies, and that can be controlled. Already it's the case that you can install Osmocom BB on an open stack, and you can start playing around and start catching some IMSIs if you want to. But they have no interest in that. They want to keep this simple, they want to keep it easy, and they're happy to pay a huge amount of money. And that's where these companies come in. They provide these complete solutions. They sell it, they provide the training, they provide the maintenance, and they provide the upkeep. And that can be controlled. And so that's where I see the difference.
Further questions?
Yes, I had a question. Concerning dual-use technologies, wouldn't you be more interested in concerning dual-use laws? Like, one of the biggest problems I see is, okay, you have the technologies, you can export or regulate them, but we have a more and more dear record here in the West of the laws we were implementing. Having a Bundestrojaner in Germany, having a new hack proposal going on in the Netherlands. We're setting a very sad example. And how can we say these countries, you cannot use the technology to surveil your citizens, while we don't have really the moral grounds anymore if we devise these kind of laws?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think that goes for a lot of net political issues where we should be leading by example and are doing the exact opposite. So, Herr Lüning, why are we not leading by example? Don't we need to start shopping inside Germany before we go and turn away somewhere else?
Bundestrojaner is actually a good example that about the difference between a working democracy and rule of law state and an authoritarian state. In any authoritarian state, the thing would have been used. In Germany, our highest court stopped it. And I think that is the difference between countries like France, or the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, that we do have a parliament that makes the laws, and that is, we do have a parliament that controls government. We do have a judiciary that is really independent and that is controlling. I mean, we're not perfect. I'm not trying to paint a picture more rosy than it is, but basically these things do work in our country. And if something that goes beyond the limits happens, usually our mechanisms will stop them. So there is a difference between a country where you have control by parliament and judiciary and an authoritarian country. So the same tool can be legitimate in one country but not legitimate in another country.
But I think the argument was also that this idea of leading by example, okay, there might be a different legal and social framework that we have here. However, other countries and other governments will perceive what Germany is doing and will take that as an excuse to push things and boundaries further in their country. And so especially here, when we get into shady areas where civil rights are undermined, and I guess the Bundestrojaner and the Schultrojaner are very good examples of that, we definitely help ease the ground for other more authoritative regimes to abuse these technologies.
Maybe
politically, I completely
it's
agree
a
with
little
that.
bit more. The law is contagious. Other countries are looking at our laws as examples to implement for their own.
Well, don't misunderstand me. I'm very much into protecting civil rights in Germany. I think it is an ongoing, constant political fight which we have to do. All these issues that we have been debated over the years, I mean, we have to be very vigilant as a society also to say, stop. This is not what we want. If society isn't clear about that, you will see let's say, the police people and these kind of people talking about security taking over. We have to, politically and as civil society, we have to constantly say, this is enough, this is the border, don't go further, and this is the red line, don't cross it. So we have to constantly do that. Nevertheless, you will always find the odd dictator from around the corner that will take anything you do as an excuse. I mean, the arguments you hear, I hear a lot of these arguments. They will take any excuse. And if you don't pass that law, they will say, well, actually that law is also, you know. We have to confront these people with saying, listen, rule of law and democracy are very clear, freedom of speech are very clear things, introduce them, and then we'll talk to you on a peer-to-peer base.
Thanks. There's another question. By the way, it's not that we're not taking questions from the... Don't be scared, everything's fine. It's not that we're not taking questions from the back, but people have just come up to be kind and help walking around with the mic, so please.
Hello. My question is not about software. My question is about the huge network companies like Nokia Siemens Network or Cisco, building countrywide networks with backdoors for governments. Could they more easily be regulated?
So Nokia Siemens Networks is a really interesting example. There's two bits in what Nokia Siemens Networks historically sold. They sold their telecommunications equipment, the backbone communications infrastructure in a country. But then they also sold an intelligence solution on top of it. Now we have across Europe standards, technical standards that force all telecommunications companies to build lawful interception capabilities by default. Into all of our technology, into all of our telecommunications products. And that's a real problem, and those standards are not preserving our privacy. They're setting a terrible example, and they're very, very hard to understand, which means fighting against them becomes a real issue as well. But what was interesting is that the telecommunications network itself, I think, is an entirely legitimate thing to be exporting. We want to encourage communication in these countries. And so for me, where Nokia Siemens stepped over the line was not exporting telecommunications equipment with effectively a socket that you could plug an interception solution into. It's the fact that they sold the interception solution on top of it. They did everything for the government. And that's where I see the difference in between kind of telecommunications companies. For me, that's where you draw that line. Absolutely, ideally, Nokia Siemens Networks would not be able to sell lawful interception capable products in the first instance. But that's what we've got in Europe. That's what we've created. But these companies can be regulated in a much more effective way. We know who they are. They have public relations team. Many of them have other revenue streams. And for me, it was very upsetting when Nokia Siemens Networks sold off their intelligence solutions system. They accepted the criticism. They said that, yes, we have done a terrible thing by selling intelligence solution systems to Iran. But rather than shutting that product line down, rather than taking responsibility for what they've created, they created a hardened little brother of a company with no other revenue streams, no reason to act ethically. And the same people continued to make and develop and sell those products. And I think that was the wrong decision by Nokia Siemens Networks.
Further questions? We have time for about 2 more. Up here, please.
Thank you. So first thing first, I'm a little bit confused about some of your statements. I actually work on Metasploit myself, and to me the difference is completely clear. So Metasploit and similar tools are open source tools, completely available to the public, completely transparent. People can understand them, can challenge them, and they have a clear positive intent. While Finfisher, for instance, it's designed and produced in secrecy, exactly to prevent that to be understood and to be blocked and identified. But I think the message from Eric actually didn't go through completely, because personally I think that regulating technology itself is completely pointless. the reason is because while you will find, FinFisher being used in Bahrain or, in Ethiopia or whatever, you will see Syria, for instance, which is completely blocked for international exports, using as much successfully, free to download spywares like Poison Ivy or whatever. So regulating the actual technology and the technical aspects of it, it's completely useless. It's not effective. The point that I think should be made is, first of all, if people using those things in a legitimate way, they should be liable for that, and they should be receiving an international political pressure when actually that happens. Countries and European Union should condemn those things publicly and transparently and tell them and call them out in those situations. And the positive aspect of regulating controls is not regulating the technology itself, it's regulating the exploitation of the service. And the reason for that is that you need to control and prevent that Western companies and European companies are witnesses and participants and, involved into the abuse of those technologies in those countries where it's actually critical conditions. And that's where it actually might be effective. Otherwise, it would be kind of pointless, I guess.
Andreas, would you like to react to that?
Well, I'm a little bit confused as to where the controversy is, because that's about exactly what I said. So.
Okay, so in that case, anybody else who'd like to get back to that? I mean, I think there's a general agreement, but I'm not 100% sure whether, if there's any disagreements, let's have reactions, let's put it that way.
Claudia's done incredible work investigating FinFisher over the last year and a half, and I think what he's highlighting is that where we are able to effectively control this technology is because of its service. And are you saying that only the service should be regulated and not the technology? And so I think that's a valid point that I understand, but I think that you can effectively control the technology because they're providing the service. And so it's, maybe I'm doing lawyer speak, but broadly I think it's a fair statement.
Yeah, and I think that's one point that we do have some consensus on, because in that little attempt to define what are we actually talking about, that's how I understood your argument as well. Let's take maybe one more, yes? The gentleman over here.
My name is Rafael Portocarrero. I'm a journalist at the European institutions. So my question, what do you expect at the European level to happen? I did an interview with Marietje Schaake, the Dutch MEP, and we made a small bet that she said, okay, if you ask 100 MEPs about zero hack days, about this technology, none will answer. I asked 4 or 5. No one knew what I was talking about. So, yeah, my question to you, what's going to happen on the European level? Thank you.
Political awareness raising. Okay, can you just repeat the part of the question? I understood that the question was, how do you actually create more political awareness?
So far you have been talking about the German parliament and the Bundestag, etc. Which role for the EU, for the European Commission? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I didn't acoustically quite understand everything you said, I believe. But first of all, I know that especially in the European Parliament, there are quite a few colleagues that are very much into all questions of civil liberties. People like Marietje Schaake and others that really look into these issues very, very strongly and really are strong advocates of dealing with these issues. That's one point. The second point is that legally, most of these issues have to be dealt with by European governments, not by Parliament, unfortunately, especially in human rights issues. Parliament is a lot more progressive than the governments of the member countries. But Wassenaar, for example, is something that the governments need to do. And also, if we have a European export, if we list someone on the European export ban list, this is a decision that's being taken by governments, by the intergovernmental part of the European Union.
Just one. I would in general say that on the European level, the awareness is stronger than on the German level. Just to give you one example, last December, European Parliament adopted a strategy of digital freedom, which at some point you can definitely criticize very heavily, but it was adopted in the last December by the European Parliament, and now it's the EU Commission's turn to somehow deal with this decision by the European Parliament. And for a longer time, the European Parliament is dealing with such a question as the German Parliament. So just to make this clear, I see there's a strong difference between the EU and Germany. And I think in Germany, in German Parliament, the debate just recently started, as in German ministry as well.
Are there any very urgent unanswered questions? But you have one unanswered question, something we've not raised yet. Okay, then let's have one final point, and then we'll do a closing round up here.
So I was wondering, what do you think is the incentive maybe for the states of the European Union not to regulate? And I was thinking maybe in an age where like cyber warfare is so important. You said it's not the economical advantage, in Germany at least. And is it possible that instead they want to foster or not disturb maybe an inner the development of a national industry, security industry, because this is what this is about also.
So is the business case not too big?
Yeah, or the national security case or the defense case, or is this not technology maybe also useful for internal reasons?
I can try to answer bits of that, and the others will have other views on this, I guess. I think it's a mixture of reasons why it's not regulated yet. Part of the reason is that governments and ministries don't really understand the problem. It's very, as we found out now, it's very hard to really describe what is it actually you need to control. Is it the service? Is it the technology itself? If you have the technology, how do you describe it? How do you try to control it? Or is it, do you have to have export bans for certain countries, or export control for certain countries, certain regimes? So that is, you have to really understand the problem before you create a law. So that is part of the explanation, I would say. And the second part is, I think there's not enough awareness yet at national levels in different countries, basically in Germany and in the UK. I think it needs to be more of a public debate and a more pressing debate. That is why it is so important, and I support so much the case that Reporters Without Borders have brought forward. It's very important to make it an issue and to raise awareness in parliaments and in government. What is this about? We have to do something. There's German technology being used for abuse of human rights, being used to suppress people. So that is part of the reason. And the third reason is that some of this technology is used also for legitimate goals. So it's difficult to make the division between a legitimate and a non-legitimate use. It's hard to really describe it to the point.
So with that, let's start a small closing round on the panel here. I'd like to begin with you, Andreas. And I'd be curious to know, because as we saw in this discussion, there's still a lot of knowledge sharing to be done when it comes to actually defining these technologies, and to make sure that this is a topic, of course, we all feel passionate about and we want something to happen, but that it doesn't take off in the wrong direction. So from your perspective, from the Chaos Computer Club, is there any planned collaboration in helping really to define what we're talking about and define the different technologies that we're talking about within this push for more export control, or what's the position there?
Yeah, we've been monitoring the scene, if you want to put it that way, for quite a while. So the companies manufacturing that equipment, where is it being used? So we've looked at the German situation, we've looked at the international situation, and we're talking to people like EFF, like Reporters Without Borders, to come up with a precise definition that will allow to control that in a manner that doesn't do any damage.
Great, thank you. Christian, can you give us some very brief insight into what are the next steps? You have this OECD complaint going. How is that going to proceed, and what should we be watching out for?
Well, our next campaigning step, we are waiting for an answer regarding our OECD complaint, which we filed in February against Trovicor and Gamma. And right now I can't say anything about the whole thing because it's in process, so we hope for a positive answer in the sense that the whole process of the OECD complaint could really start. But I think it's no secret that there are within German government different positions on the topics. Just formally, this OECD complaint has to be allowed by the Ministry of Economics. There is a so-called OECD national contact point, and we know from other cases that the OECD complaint mechanism in Germany is not working really well, comparing to the UK, for example, where it's much more transparent and participation of civil society is much better possible than in Germany. And our next step is, from a campaigning perspective, the next Wassenaar conference, which takes place in December in Vienna, and that's where we are looking now to.
Thank you. Looking at what's happening in Germany now and what you're doing with your organization, how can we use this kind of small momentum that's maybe building up to push things in other European countries and on a European level?
Well, I think critically now, we do have the understanding that we need to be able to introduce export controls on surveillance technology. There are lines that need to be worked out, but if you go to privacyinternational.org/SII, that stands for Surveillance Industry Index, we've catalogued the 355 surveillance companies who are selling products that we think should be controlled. There are policy papers there. We've published our export control list, our technical definition of the things we would like to be controlled. And I think that we're now in a position where governments can act. I think that the German and British government need to lead on this. They're two countries that have the highest density of surveillance companies anywhere in the world who are actively exporting this technology. And I think that they need to take interim steps to put controls in place now. The Wassenaar arrangement is absolutely the end goal, but it will take 2 to 3 years before we get agreement there. It will take another year for that to come down to the EU, and potentially another year for that to be implemented domestically as well. Currently, the EU is 4 years behind on implementing Wassenaar. That's why we need interim, urgent action by both the British government and German government as soon as possible.
Thank you, Eric. Marcus, how can we help do exactly that? And again, like with your call for action, raising awareness within the German government, or all of us here, and yourself.
Well, first of all, any public event like this one helps. Any media attention given to the issue helps. Complaints filed like the one by Reporters Without Borders helps. So I think it's important to simply lobby your member of parliament, your federal government, me, write letters and just be active on the issue. I think that's one thing that needs to do. I think the German government is aware of the problem. Foreign Minister has clearly said that he wants export control. We're talking to the Ministry of Economics, where it's more difficult because now we get down to the, what do we actually want? What does control mean? Is it what you were talking about? Is it what you were talking about? How do we get that down to the ground? What I will definitely do coming back from this meeting is I'm just preparing a letter to Philipp Rösler, which I will finish now with the input I got here, and will urge him to move. I know that they're talking about this in the ministry. I know that he wants to move on the issue, so I will add some pressure to that.
Thank you very much. And with that, we have come to the end of our hour. I would like to thank, first of all of you for listening so attentively and bringing forth such great questions. And I'd like to thank my panelists for the engaged discussion. And I hope you allow me again just to give a special thanks to Marcus Löning for freeing my participant from Madagascar from his deportation cell at the Charles de Gaulle airport very successfully. Thank you very much for that. Thanks to all of you.